Palden Sawe Lama Rinpoche Daka Chawar Bede Denjola Gadin Chenbu Gone Jezungte Kwasong Tocheng Drop Saltu So Sanji Chudan Sojin Chonam La Sancha Parta Dane Chap Sanji Taka Jensu Jibi Sunam Chindro La Pansara Sanjindro Pareshu Simchen Tamshe Dewa Tang Dewe Jutang Dembara Churchi Dohngal Tang Dohngal Cha Jatang Trawar Churchi Dohngal Mebi Dewa Tamba Tang Mendral Wara Churchi Yaring Chatan Yitang Trawe Tang Yom Shembola Nip Churche. So good morning everybody, or afternoon, and apologies for keeping you waiting, but we thought that there might be more kind of refugees from the marathon, and looks like it's still going on, so that might not happen, but not to worry. So today I've been asked to say something about women in Buddhism, or women in the Kagyu lineage, or whatever, Kagyu tradition, and that it's Lama Rinpoche specifically wanted this topic, and it's one that he's often quite keen on, because it seems to be fairly topical, and lots of people have an interest in it. Lots of people have questions about it or doubts about it, and also a lot of people have very strong feelings. So I'd like to speak a little bit about what I've come to hear about and what my experience has been, and my conclusion, just in case you'd like to hear that and then go, is that really if there is any kind of discrimination against women in Buddhism, that can only be carried out by people who don't truly understand the teaching of the Dharma, the teaching of the Buddha. So there's no justification for it. However, there could be situations where that might arise, and some people feel convinced that that is the case, and I think it's probably true in some instances. But because of the times we live in, then because of the social attitudes kind of prevalent in our own society, it's very conducive to everybody having equal opportunities. So really, as time goes on, it can only get better. And not that it necessarily is all that bad at the moment. So what I'd like to look at, start at the beginning with the life of the Buddha and then kind of work through to see how and why things are the way they are, how they're understood in the way that they are, and how they're misunderstood in the way that they are. So if we look at the time when the Buddha lived in India, then what I've heard about that is that the prevalent kind of spiritual tradition was the Vedic tradition. So I'm no expert on that, but I believe that in its kind of original or ancient, relatively pure form, then women had a fairly good position. They were quite highly regarded. I don't know if they were considered equal to men, but certainly they were considered to have some kind of spiritual potential. So they could practice, and they were given certain kind of rights and privileges. However, things evolved, and by the time when the Buddha was around, then it really wasn't a good time to be a woman. So women were regarded as just the possessions of their husbands, and the only potential that any woman could have in a spiritual way or any way was to just be totally obedient to her husband. And it didn't matter whether he was a good husband or not, that was the only option available to her. And if she was unfortunate enough not to get a husband, then she was like a social outcast. She was an object of shame. So there was very limited kind of potential, And then, especially since when your husband died, if a young girl gets married off to an old husband, then he dies, he gets burned, she gets burned too. So it's not really something to look forward to. So you can see why people might think it wasn't a good idea to be a woman, because it wasn't nice. The best she could do would be to work hard as a housewife and produce loads of children. And if she failed to do that, like if she didn't manage to find a husband or didn't manage to produce children once she got one, then she would be relegated at best, and a younger wife would be found, or wives, or she might even be outcast. And just producing children wasn't enough. They had to be male children, because there was this very strong belief that there must be a male child who could carry out the funeral rites for the father when he died. And if there wasn't that, then he couldn't get anywhere. So it was absolutely essential for every man to have male heir. And I think that persisted until the present day. I know of at least one family where a man I know had to go to India when his father died because he was the son and he had to conduct the funeral rites. And otherwise, the man who died or the family would believe that the father had no hope spiritually in the afterlife or in his future life or whatever. So it was very, very male-oriented and very difficult for women. So then the Buddha comes along, and we can see from his teaching, he says all sentient beings have Buddha nature. And he didn't say some sentient beings have more Buddha nature than others. He said they all have Buddha nature. They are all equal in that they have Buddha nature. Therefore, you can't say that kind of ultimately one type of being has more potential than another. They all have that potential. You can't say that the male of a particular species has more potential than the female. They have equal potential. However, in the social conditions of the time, women didn't have a lot of opportunity. But as the Buddha taught and he gathered students and they were influenced by that teaching and by the practice of that teaching, then attitudes slowly changed a bit. So during the time of the Buddha, attitudes towards women in general did change. But of course it took time. So then, you may know the story of the Buddha and how his mother passed away 7 days after he was born, and he was brought up by an aunt. So after the Buddha had become a little bit known as a teacher, his aunt arrived, accompanied by 500 women from the royal palace where he'd been brought up, and requested to take ordination as nuns. So up till that point, there had only been male monks. There hadn't been female ordained followers. So apparently the Buddha refused. He said he wouldn't allow them to join the community. And then sometime later, one of his closest disciples petitioned on their behalf, and the Buddha relented and accepted. And so that is sometimes interpreted as being the Buddha not willing to accept women and having to be persuaded, so he didn't really want to do it. But then if we look at the situation and the responsibility that the Buddha undertook, or that he took on by saying yes, then he had to consider the safety of these women for a start. Lone women travelling around in India, and the Buddha would wander around with, accompanied by his thousands of monks. For women to travel together was unheard of and very dangerous. So he had to set things up so that they could be protected. So one way that he did that, eventually, not initially, but eventually, it's kind of long stories and all sorts of different parts, so we don't have time today to go into every aspect of it. But eventually, the nuns ended up having rather more vows than the monks had. So the reason for that was protection. So if you look, for example, if you happen to be familiar with, the 350 odd vows that nuns have and the 250 odd vows that monks have, then you can compare them. You'll see that they're a lot more relating to relationships with the opposite sex for women than for men. So the reason for that is that there had to be things, for example, like saying that a woman could not travel alone. A nun could not travel alone. Why? Because she could be killed. So it had to be a rule. Otherwise, there would be some risk. So it's just a bit like today, where you have to kind of abide by health and safety, or you jeopardise the safety of the individual and also the organisation. I think it's a bit like that, except, of course, in quite a different context. So there are ways of looking at this which could make it look, seem negative. But if we really think about how it must have been at that time, then it's phenomenal that it happened at all. Also, an argument that I heard around this that I think is very interesting is that when the Buddha first taught, they say he taught in 3 separate turnings of the wheel of the Dharma. So the first wheel of Dharma is about things like more kind of outer concrete things. So you have to live a good life and you follow the Eightfold Noble Path and you obey the rules, and then things go well for you. So that's very, very kind of superficial. But there's that kind of emphasis. Although, of course, there is, the stuff about emptiness and everything as well. But it's something that's relatively easy to kind of comprehend. And so people practice that for a while. So then you could say those who are open to it, then he teaches the next turning of the wheel of Dharma. So that's about how, just as we ourselves want liberation from samsara or from freedom from suffering, others do too. So we start to care for all mother sentient beings. So you can imagine that if somebody is practicing at that level, all they want is for others to be free from suffering. So how can it be that they're caring more for these or thinking more highly of this kind of group of sentient beings and less for that group of sentient beings? So it just makes no sense at all for men to be more important than women. It cannot possibly pertain, especially since all the teaching about loving kindness and compassion and developing bodhicitta is based on gratitude and love for the mother. So the caring mother is the example of the Mahayana practitioner. So the mother is respected more than anybody else. If you look at this level of teaching and the symbol of the prajna paramata, the perfection of wisdom, that is a female image. The female represents wisdom. That's like the wisdom of the Buddha. So then if we look on to the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, the Vajrayana level, which I won't say much about because I don't understand much about it, that is often kind of characterized by what we call the 14 root downfalls. So if you're a good Vajrayana practitioner, you never break these 14 things. And the 14th is not to denigrate women. So at the Vajrayana level of practice, if you even think or say or do something negative aimed towards women, you completely break your samaya commitment. So in that case, not only are women seen as equal, but they must be objects of respect. So if you understand anything of the Buddha's teaching, there's no room at any level to think that women are less than men. And you can see that reflected in how it was with the Buddha, because although at the time, women were supposed to be kept out of sight because they couldn't control themselves, and so they had to be kept at home and all covered up and all that kind of thing. Apparently there was at least one very wealthy, kind of intelligent woman whose name I can't remember, but she was a very close student of the Buddha and also a sponsor, and she would visit him frequently. and very beautiful and adorned and nicely dressed and all that. She would come, she'd mingle with the monks and all that, and nobody said anything about it. Nobody said, "You're a woman, get out." It wasn't like that at all. She was an ardent student. She was committed to the practice, and yet she appeared in all her kind of worldly finery, and that was totally acceptable. So, and also interestingly, there have been kind of studies done over the last few hundred years of the various countries where Buddhism spread. So, like Burma and Thailand and Sri Lanka and all that. Maybe not Thailand. Tibet. And it seems like if you look at things, for example, like the marriage ceremony, in those countries, women have a greater status or more rights or more freedom than in non-Buddhist countries. At the least, they have that. And in some places, it seems like they're the boss. But there are notable exceptions, and it seems very much the case that what happened is that Buddhism was slightly coloured by the conditioning of the people in the society where it travelled to. So in some countries, it looks like there was more general freedom, and some a little bit less. And that's because of how the people were. And so, when Buddhism comes to the West, where there's, in the last 50 or 100 years, there's been a movement towards equality for women, and hopefully less discrimination all round, then it's much easier for that to be quite predominant. So there's definitely no excuse for anything other than equality. But anyway, if we look through history, so from the time of the Buddha, when these nuns first became practitioners, and some of them, you can read their stories, some of them became really great practitioners and achieved arhathood, or whatever you call it. They achieved realization. So that happened at the time of the Buddha, and it has happened all through history since then. And there are certain examples. So there are some that are really quite well known, and you've probably heard about, and there are others not so well known. And whether or not there have been lots of women like that at a certain time or not, I think depends more on the society, because say, for example, we're talking about Mahayana Buddhism, so then a great practitioner is somebody who just wants to be there to benefit beings. So how can you really benefit beings? If you're somebody who's in a position of influence, then you can influence or affect or hopefully encourage a greater number of human beings than if you're in a very lowly position. So you may choose a very lowly position sometimes, but obviously quite often it's useful to be in a position of influence and respect, because you can do things like, if you're a king or whatever, you can change laws. So that happened in Tibet. So when Buddhism was established, it was under the rule of, they call the great Dharma kings. And there were several generations of those. And so there were several generations, and then unfortunately there's a bit of a deterioration, because there was a really naughty king who did lots of naughty things and caused lots of trouble. But then later there were other kings who caused the reintroduction of Buddhism and a kind of great flourishing of the Dharma again, or renewal of the Dharma in Tibet. So it's understandable that we tend to hear a lot about men in history, because usually they were the ones who gained the high level of respect, and therefore they're the ones that the history books write about. But there are lots of women nevertheless. So I'd like to tell you about some of them who you may or may not have heard of. So for example, these days a lot of people are kind of quite interested in what we call either the Shangpa Kagyu or the Datshang Kagyu, right? You've heard of that? It's a kind of lesser known, and it's not strictly Kagyu tradition, but Kalu Rinpoche is one of the great lineage holders of the Dakshang or Shampa Kagyu. So it's become quite well known in the West amongst Tibetan Buddhists. So then where did that come from? So it was established in Tibet by a Lama called Chungpo Naljar. So Chungpo Naljar was a little bit like Marpa, and he was more or less contemporary with Marpa in that he travelled. He was a great practitioner, very educated. He travelled to India to receive teaching. So I believe he received teaching from quite a number of people, but the most significant teachers, there were two of them, and they were both women. So one was called Neguma, and Neguma is described as either the wife or the sister of Tilopa. And she's, if you know the story of Naropa, she's the one who manifested as a very ugly Dakini when he was the abbot of Nalanda University, and she was very upset because he claimed to understand the meaning of what he was studying. And so she said, you need to go and find my brother. So that's when he got the kind of message to go and find his teacher. Anyway, Neguma apparently had what Naropa had. Naropa had what we call the 6 yogas of Naropa, these particular practices that he gathered together and which were passed on through Marpa, down through the Kagyu lineage. So Neguma had the 6 yogas of Neguma. So I don't know exactly what they are, because I've never practiced in a Shampa Kagyu retreat, so I haven't really heard much about them. But anyway, she had those, and they are significant in that their practices, like the 6 yogas of Naropa, that if you really practice them properly, you will gain realization. You can get enlightened doing these things. So she wasn't just an ordinary kind of her garden Dharma teacher. She was pretty special. So then, who was the other teacher? Sukhasiddhi. You've heard of Sukhasiddhi, and do you know the story of Sukhasiddhi? Because it's quite a nice story. Because she was like an ordinary lady, and she had a husband and 6 children, 3 daughters, 3 sons. And at a certain point when she was already, not very young, I have no idea what that was. It sounds like Darth Vader or something.
That's Emil's phone.
Yes.
Great.
I
remember this sound.
Yeah, it does sound a bit familiar. I think it's just a text coming in.
Yes,
it's nothing,
yes.
no big deal. And I think he's otherwise occupied at the moment. Anyway, at the time of this story, there was a drought and a famine in this particular part of India where she lived. And so the family had only 1 pot of rice left in their food store. And so they decided that they just put that aside, and then the husband and the daughters and the son went out to look for, the daughters and the sons went out to look for food, and they went off in different directions and searched. And then meantime, the mother was left at home, and along came this old beggar, and she felt really sorry for him, and he was in an even worse state that she was. And so what she did was she cooked up all the rice and she gave it to him. So then all the family come back, and they have found no food. So they want the mother to prepare the rice so that they can eat it, so they can go and look for more food. And of course there was no rice left, and they were not happy. So they were so unhappy because they thought, she's done this kind of thing before, because she was very kind-hearted. So they threw her out. So she was destitute. So she wandered off. And apparently she left that area and she went to the country that's called Udayana, where Guru Rinpoche came from. But this is a different time, so it's a few hundred years later. But apparently as soon as she reached that place, that country, her mind settled and she became clear, and she eventually managed to find her way and managed to beg or be given some rice, and she started to make rice wine and to sell it in a market. And she made particularly delicious rice wine, so she became quite well known and people would buy, and so she did quite well. So eventually one woman would come and buy her wine and take it away, and eventually after some time then the rice seller, Sukha Siddhi, said, "Oh, who's the wine for?" And it turned out it was for a yogi in the forest. And so she said, "Well, in that case, I'd like to offer it to him." So the wine keeps going, and then eventually the yogi says, "Where'd you get this from if you don't have to pay for it?" And so the attendant says, "Oh, it's from this really wonderful, devoted seller of wine in the market." And so he says, "Oh, I think I'd like to help her." So they arranged to meet, and apparently as soon as she heard, the Sukha Siddhi heard about this yogi, she felt filled with devotion, and then she receives the instruction, he gives the profound instructions to her. She immediately, gets the point. And apparently at that point she would have been 61 years old, looking like a normal 61-year-old woman. But after a single day of practice, she was so accomplished so she was obviously very ripe for the practice. She became incredibly beautiful and youthful. And she looked like a 16-year-old girl, and apparently she was so beautiful you just couldn't take your eyes off her, that kind of thing. So great signs of accomplishment and all that. So she became like a wisdom dakini, and she was teaching, and this Chumpo Naljar received teaching from her. So the teaching that these two women, Naguma and Sukha Siddhi, gave to Chumpo Naljar, they form the basis of what is now the Shampa Kagyu lineage. So it is entirely based on the teaching of women. So if an entire lineage is based on teaching that came from women, then it doesn't make sense that there can be an idea within Tibetan Buddhism at all that there's a problem with women. And if you look further, then you can see lots of other examples. For example, earlier, when Guru Rinpoche went to Tibet, then he had lots of different students. Who was the first one? Yeshe Tsojal, a princess. Was actually one of the wives of the king, who'd already been through quite a bit, but she was only 16 or something when she met Guru Rinpoche. Anyway, she practiced very diligently, and she became one of the greatest teachers in Tibet. And she wrote the life story of Guru Rinpoche, which has been translated into English. So she's very significant, and she also was involved with hiding away these like hidden treasures that were later revealed and all this kind of thing. So she was very, very important. And then apparently a later incarnation of Yeshe Tsojal was Machik Labji Drunma, the woman who established the Chu lineage. And Chu is very significant because it is the only teaching, Buddhist teaching, that originated in Tibet. And Chu is practiced in all Tibetan lineages. There are a few practices like that, but Chu is a very significant one. It's practiced in all the Tibetan Buddhist lineages, and on top of that, it is the only teaching that went from Tibet to India. So at the time when Machik Labji Drunma was alive, Buddhism was still flourishing in India. And apparently the great masters in Nalanda University heard about this woman who was teaching this Chu practice, and they were very suspicious. So they sent a delegation to Tibet to check it out. And they debated with her, and they looked at what she was saying and analysed it, and they came to the conclusion that it was valid. In fact, it was highly beneficial. So they took the teaching from her, and they brought it back to India. So she's the only Tibetan teacher ever to have been able to pass back to India. But if you can find out the story because it's quite easily available, but she was actually the incarnation of a Tibetan yogi, an Indian male yogi who had been meditating in a cave, and apparently his consciousness left and went off to Tibet and became Machik Labji Drunma at the same time as this yogi's body is still there, still meditating. So when this delegation came to check out Machik Labji Drunma, she told them this, and they went back, they found the cave, and they found the yogi sitting there. So It's all nice and colourful stuff, you know. But it's all written down, it's got to be true. Anyway, there are all these stories. So the point is that this teaching is very significant, and it's not just something that women thought, oh great, here's something we can do. Everybody practices Chu. You can find wandering yogis everywhere. Well, maybe not in Dublin, but you know, in Tibet, certainly in the past, you could find them everywhere who were just practicing that and nothing else. They're very profound, and you can just, you know, do that practice and nothing else, and you can gain everything from it if you are a very sincere practitioner. So that also is quite significant. And then another aspect of Tibetan Buddhism that you hear about a lot is this Turku system. So you know how the Dalai Lama, the Karmapa, people like that, Akron Rinpoche, there's one and then there's another, and so when one passes away, in the case of the Karmapa, he leaves information, and then that is later used to find the next incarnation, and then the Karmapa can recognize incarnations of other Tulkus. So, for example, Akron Rinpoche was recognized by the 16th Karmapa. And we hope that the next incarnation of Akron Tulku will be recognized by the 17th Karmapa before too long. So that system exists in Tibetan Buddhism. However, mostly you hear about male Tulkus, and there isn't a lot of talk about female Tulkus. But there is, I know of at least one very notable exception to that. And the current Tulku is the 12th of this female line. So again, you can check out about this, but the name of the Tulku is Samding Dorji Pamo. And so I think the first Samding Dorji Pamo was in about the 14th or 15th century. And she was really quite something. So she did a lot of work to help women. She was a fully ordained nun. She was a kind of local princess who really wanted to get into spiritual life, but her family wanted her to get married because it was very important for the kingdom to unite with the nearby kingdom. Anyway, eventually she did manage to do that, and she did a lot to help promote good conditions for nuns, to help education for women, but then also she did things like helping introduce printing presses, helping to devise a good system of irrigation for the crops in the local area. She had a very good relationship with the king of Tibet called Tangtong Gyalpo, who's famous for building bridges all over Tibet. She had a very significant role. Anyway, she later, the next incarnation was discovered by Tangtong Gyalpo, and so that line of Tulkus persisted. And there's one particular story about her from about the 1770s or something, when apparently there was an invasion of Tibet, and Samding Dorji Pamo's monastery was quite near Lhasa, and she had both monks and nuns under her, and she herself was mostly a nun through all her incarnations, although the current one apparently is not. But there were various kind of things that she did, this Samding Dorji Pamo. So one was that although she was a nun, she would have long hair. Another one was that she was not permitted to lie down at night. So she's supposed to practice all night long. She doesn't sleep. And some of the Dorji Pamos were, supposed to have really great powers. So at one point there was this invasion, and the kind of leader of the invasion had heard about her, and so he wanted to kind of check it out for himself. So he came to her monastery and he sent a letter in saying, "Come and meet me. I want to come out." And she sent back a kind of polite refusal. And so he didn't like that, obviously. So he decided to take the monastery or the nunnery or whatever by force. So he kind of barged in with all the soldiers and came in there in the main shrine room. He saw that it was filled with pigs. And then there was this very large sow. Dorji Pamo means Vajra, pig lady. The pig is often associated with ignorance, and therefore also with the purification of ignorance, which is wisdom. So the image of the pig is very important. And if you have a wheel of life, you'll see that in the centre of the picture of the wheel of life, there are 3 animals which represent the 3 mind poisons. And the pig is the one that represents ignorance. So anyway, he saw this massive sow at the head of all these sows and pigs, and they were all grunting away, or whatever noise they make, and so he was completely foxed by that and went away. But then later he heard that it was her, and so I can't remember if he went back or what, but anyway, he was totally overwhelmed with devotion for this when he realised that it was actually Samding Dorje Pamo and all her monks and nuns, and that she'd kind of created a force field or something that meant he perceived them as these things. So he was converted to Buddhism and became her student. Anyway, the great thing about Tibetan Buddhism, or one of the great things, is the colourful stories. So this story was actually related by, some English man went into Tibet and wrote down this story, and so that's how I came across it. So these things are all recorded. So then one other example I'd like to refer to is a great female practitioner who's not a tulku and who died in 1951, but she was famous throughout Tibet. And I think her name was Shuksep Jetsenma. And she was a great practitioner, and she had a lot of different students. And one of those was the 16th Karmapa, who visited her and received teaching from her before he left Tibet in 1959. So I think he took teaching from her. It must have been quite young, because it was before 1951 when she died. Anyway, she was a more kind of recent great practitioner. So there are and have been great female practitioners always, and whether we hear a lot about them or not, the fact is they did exist, and there were a lot of them. And some of them were quite high profile, but many were not. But that doesn't mean that they're less valid. Just because you don't hear about somebody doesn't mean that they haven't done amazing things. And sometimes the most important people, the people that we all depend on, are people who nobody ever knows about. But they're the ones who are doing the work. So I think that's, whether we hear about somebody or not is completely irrelevant. In fact, a true practitioner isn't looking for any kind of recognition. So they should be more happy to be unrecognised and to be kind of under everybody else and serving. The idea of the bodhisattva is somebody who serves others, who makes life comfortable for them. And there's this wonderful prayer where you actually pray to become a bridge or a road. Or I remember Akram Rinpoche once saying we should all be, this was the 1980s, he said we should all pray to be digital watches or computers, because that's what people depend on. Now, of course, it should be little devices or whatnot, because people really need these things, and if they've got a good one, then their life is easier. So it's at that level, it's not to be something where everybody's thinking, what a wonderful person they are. It's more like you're supporting in a very hidden way. If it's unconditional, then it's nothing to do with visibility. It's just whatever will make life comfortable and good and facilitate development in others. So that can take the form of being an example, or it can take the form of providing suitable conditions. So it could be the cleaner. The person who cleans the toilets is the person that we need the most in Dharma centres anyway. Mm-hmm. The person who makes all the food or does all the washing up, they're much more important than somebody who stands and gives loads of big talks. So it depends on how you look at things. And then in terms of the modern day, there are a couple of points I'd like to make. So one is, Tibetans, sometimes people say, oh yeah, look at them, there's all these monasteries and all these big lamas, and they didn't really care about women and that kind of thing. And I think that quite possibly in Tibet, I don't know much about how things really were in Tibet. You hear things, and whether that's true or not, who knows. But you can imagine that some kind of system that was very centred around monasteries and went on for hundreds and hundreds of years, then of course habits develop and things are as they are, and then changing them isn't that easy. But then, of course, in 1959 and the years following that, many Tibetans had to just leave. Like, Akron Rinpoche, Lama Yeshe Rinpoche, they got 2 hours notice to leave everything behind. And then the journey involved losing even those things. So they arrive with absolutely nothing, and they have to start from scratch. If they've got their lives, they're lucky, because everybody was dying all over the place. So it's a new time, and very difficult, but also filled with opportunity for change. So many things can be introduced easily, relatively easily, that could not be introduced in the very set tradition that was existing in their native country. So things are changing, and one of those things is education for women, opportunity for nuns, reintroducing into the Tibetan traditions the lineage for full ordination for women. And that happens on a high level, but also a low level. So at the moment, if you follow the kind of, the Buddhist news, then you'll see that the Karmapa is doing a lot of work to reintroduce full ordination for women within the Kagyu tradition. However, I note that Lama Yeshe Rinpoche also did his bit. So in 1998, he took 12 of us to Bodh Gaya to a big international, interdenominational Buddhist ordination for women. And so from a Chinese tradition, women of many different Buddhist traditions from lots of different countries came together and received that ordination. And the Chinese people were incredibly kind. They were kind in a material way. They sponsored and subsidised anyone who needed it. But also they were generous in that they allowed representatives of each tradition to be the preceptors. So there were a total of 27 preceptors in this ordination. And so there were representatives from all the traditions, as well as whoever it was who held the full the Pratimoksha vow side of things, the actual monks or nuns' vows. And so, like I say, Lama Yeshe Rinpoche was the only Tibetan Lama who was present there. There was a representative from the Dalai Lama who attended as a witness, just to observer, to see how things were. But there was only one fully participating Tibetan Lama, so that was Lama Yeshe. And then there were all of us guinea pigs. So we went along and we did the ordination, and I think there were still, whispers about we don't know if this is a broken lineage or not. But anyway, we did it, and already that's 20 years ago. And so gradually things have been able to filter upwards, because the way that Lama Yeshe puts it is, he's nobody, so he can do what he likes. So he can change things or be more free with the tradition than other, like for the Dalai Lama himself, it would be very difficult. But now the Karmapa's younger, and also he's still a refugee, or until very recently he was still a refugee. So in a way he doesn't or didn't have rights, but that also brings its own freedom. So he's been able to gradually start through the vehicle of the Kagyu Munlam to introduce different things. And so he's been able to go back to the original form in several different things. So he's put more influence on and more emphasis on the genuine practices, the ancient kind of the Sanskrit versions of the prayers and this kind of thing. So he's kind of refreshing and checking things out from in the past, how they were long ago, and bringing these more to the forefront. And also he's doing a lot to support the ordination. And then because some groundwork or some kind of, we just kind of came along and did our little bit, then that helps also to support that activity, because there's something that's been done already and it hasn't gone wrong yet, you know. So there's already a bit of a foundation there. So as far as Tibetan Buddhism is concerned, there's a lot of emphasis now on educating women. You can see there are Khenmos as well as Khenpos. And then we haven't got a female name for Lama, but we've got lady Lamas as well as male Lamas. And certainly in our own tradition, in our own organisation, then we seem to have 3 Western Lamas, and they are women. We don't have an Irish one yet, so you'll have to find somebody. We don't have a Scottish one either. We've got a Dane, we've got a Spaniard, and we've got a Catalonian, and we've got a French. Yes, the French are all right. Got their representative there. Got one in quick. But we don't have any others just yet. Anyway, they're women, and they're doing big jobs. You know, you don't become a Lama just like that. You have to take quite a big commitment. So they've got this commitment to establish monasteries, for example. You know, it's not an easy thing to do.
I was thinking that, just casting my mind around the Kagyu, not only the Kagyu centres, but the Palpon centres, and there are women running all of them, or the majority of the ones that I can think of.
Yes.
Yeah. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and
even across to Portugal and out to Finland, and
It is interesting. Certainly in the Sami Dzongs, it's all women, and some of them quite spectacular in a way. Yeah, like Lama Zondru in Spain, you know, she's got at least 5 centres and maybe 7 under her. And then Lama Rinchen has got dumped with this having to, you know, actually create a Sami Ling, not just a Sami Dzong. And then Lama Zamo has London, which is really large, and actually today Lama Yeshe's just been talking about how he's kind of stolen things from her. You know, she managed to finance a good deal of the building work in Sami Ling. She's provided shrines for several other Sami Dzongs. She's got tankas from her place in almost every Sami Dzong that exists. So she's been able to share outwards with other centres that don't have so much. So, and yeah, all those centres are run by women. And even in Sami Ling, if you look at most of the significant jobs, then they're done by women. In fact, Lama Yeshe complains about the nuns, because he says the nuns frighten away the monks. We've got so many nuns and hardly any monks, and we're doing our best to kind of redress that, but it's taking time. It's very interesting because the leaders are men. You know, we've got an abbot, we've got a deputy abbot, and maybe they frighten the monks away, I don't know. But anyway, we don't have many monks at all, but we've got a lot of nuns. And the retreats also, you know, there are more women than men. And it's supposed to be that there are actually more women on the planet than men, so it could be something to do with that, but who knows. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. You know, it's not like it's a competition, but we don't need to think that there's a lack of opportunity for women. It's being proven that there is, because women are accomplishing it. And if we feel like there aren't enough women, or at least if women feel that there aren't enough women, there is something they can do about it. You know, they just do the work and they achieve it themselves. So I've heard Lama Yeshe say many times, you know, if you think there aren't enough women teachers, become one. Because it's not that there is no opportunity, but it takes quite a lot of effort. Whether you're a man or a woman, it takes loads of effort. So the challenge is really the same for everybody. And I guess it's just a matter of whether we have the conditions that are supportive of that.
Because there needs to be some kind of a groundswell of invitations. I mean, because if you can't put yourself forward.
Why not?
That is not advocated, in my understanding. That's not advocated in terms of how we work with our ego, if you like. But you know, one has to be invited.
In a way, but what, like, if if we're talking about Mahayana again, then if there's a job needs doing, we do it. So we do the job. We're not looking for recognition, but we do it, and so we can become a real adept just through offering service.
So you're talking about teacher in a much broader context.
All right, okay.
The toilet cleaner and the
and then in terms of the teacher, so one of my jobs, organising courses.
Yeah.
So I see, who is attractive to what sort of student. And there's some people who are incredible, like you're all familiar with Donal. What has he got to recommend himself? Incredible kindness, total humility. I've never known him to push himself forward in any way whatsoever. And I've known him, maybe not as well or as long as some of you, but for quite a long time. So the qualities that are respected and that bring a kind of success, recognition, are not, look at me.
Yeah.
It could be that a bodhisattva could be doing that because sometimes it's helpful because some people can't trust it unless the person is really upfront and saying, I can do this and I can do that. And I feel like Akwa Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe, these are male examples, so forgive me, but Akwa Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe Rinpoche are good because Akwa Rinpoche, if you asked him, what are your qualities, he'd say, I'm a fool. I know nothing. Don't ask me, I'll only tell you lies, and all that kind of stuff. Lama Yeshe say, my holy owl project, and I have these, and this, and that. He can tell you all these things, and it's all fantastic. They're quite different, and both, I can see the usefulness of both. They can both be very, very impressive, and they're both attractive to different types of people, and both seem to have been quite effective. So I think there's room for lots of different types of personality. So being very forward can be useful, or being very, very reticent can also be useful. And being, they're also the examples of people who do nothing except stay and retreat. And maybe they're the most powerful of all. And I think everyone can serve their part, and I think they're all needed. We need the people who are locked away or just practicing all the time. And we need the ones who are out there on the big stage, being seen and becoming famous. And we need all of us in between doing our bit. So I think there's definitely something for every type of person, and definitely, men and women. And one image that I think is really significant, very important, is that in terms of the qualities required for total enlightenment, you could divide them into two. Wisdom, skillful means, or wisdom and compassion. So wisdom is the feminine, represented by female figures. So any picture in Tibetan Buddhism where you see a female figure, that represents wisdom. And then the male, skillful means, compassion, the male figure represents skillful means or compassion. Or in terms of the 6 paramitas, the 6 perfections, so the first 5 are skillful means, represented by the male, and the 6th, kind of the most important of all. Hello. Bye. So the 6th, the perfection of wisdom, is represented by the female figure. So we need both of those. So if you have a picture of Dorji Chang, which you're bound to have somewhere, anyway, Dorji Chang has, the primordial Buddha, has arms crossed and holds a bell and a dorji, bell and Vajra and bell. And so the bell symbolises wisdom, and the dorji symbolises skillful means. So an arms crossed means united, unified, inseparable. So those are the qualities that are required, combined, to make a fully enlightened being. So male and female are needed equally. They're equally essential. So in all of us, if any one of us wants to get enlightened, we have to have those qualities. So we can't say one is more important than the other. They're both needed. So that's what I have to say. Does anybody have any questions or points for debate?
So the people out there on the world stage, as you describe it, who are seen and people know and sort of worship in that way, are they usually men? They are usually men in Buddhism, in Tibetan Buddhism. Would you say?
It looks like quite a lot of them are male. I wouldn't know for sure because I'm not good at knowing like history or what's current. But certainly these days, if you can, for Western practitioners, there are lots of women who are quite well known. But the point about, or the question about the big names is that we don't know if they're famous for one reason or another. Is it that they are the best practitioners or the best representatives of Buddhism, the most accomplished or whatever? Or is it just that they happen to be famous?
So you described how in Buddhism, in the centres that it's women who are running a lot of the centres and do so many things. And then is that not just repeating the history of the world when it comes to women and men, that's often the case? It's the women who's doing all the hard graft. And it's the men. Do you know what?
Yeah, I know what you mean. And it remains to be seen. I think the point is that some of these people are also the teachers. So if you look at the people who are at that level of teachers in our organisation, there are more women. So that's something that's seen as worthy of respect. The top level seem to be mostly men at the moment. But there's also some conjecture that Akron Rinpoche, who is of course the most significant person for this organisation because he started it, that we don't know who he'll be or what sex, which country. So well, I wouldn't be at all surprised if he thought, right, well, I'm going to be a woman. Deal with it,
Yeah.
I think it's up to us, because these days, in our society, there's no excuse for one part of society to do better than others. We can do it. I know even before I was a nun, the job I had, the place where I worked, it wasn't like women, as far as I know, were worse paid or didn't have the same opportunity or whatever. It was something that it didn't occur to me but to expect to be treated equally. So, that was a wee while ago too. So I think that in the way our society is going, then we can't complain that that there's no opportunity. We can make the opportunity if we know how to. And it's not more difficult for women, I would say, than it is for men. In fact, some men are saying that it's not fair. They're being discriminated against now.
Well, maybe that has to happen a little bit before a balance can.
Who knows? Yes,
I think
what I feel like is, the Buddha taught everyone has Buddha nature. We have to respect the Buddha nature and the potential of all sentient beings. And if I think I'm more important than others, then I'm not practicing according to the teaching of the Buddha. So I respect everybody. In the Mahayana level of practice, the idea is that others become more important to us than we are ourselves. And if somebody is actually able to practice according to that, then they are enormously powerful. They're enormously attractive.
I agree.
So I think that's what we should be aiming towards. And I think it's important for those of us who are concerned about whether women and men have the same opportunity to see that there is the opportunity, but I don't think it's the most critical thing. I think the most critical thing is that in general, in the world and in our society, there's a kind of degeneration of spiritual life, and there's a lack of spiritual people, and we really need more. Our society is becoming more and more secular. More and more people are totally disillusioned with religion or spirituality, And so we have to do everything we can to strengthen it because the world needs it. So we do have a big job to do. Okay.
Can I ask,
Yes.
just in case you know, I think it was Drupal Rinpoche who talked about a nun and abbess who took over Larangar.
Oh yes, I wanted to talk about her.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Okay.
So have you heard of Larangar, or Setar, I think it's, or Serta?
Serta.
So there's this, in I think it was 1980, a Lama called Jamie Punsot Rinpoche set up a Nyingma college. And he started off with, I think, 30 monks. And the idea was that it was just a college, so a Dharma college. And he taught for free. And anyone who wanted to come could come, but they had to abide by the rules. So what happens if you go there, you have to provide your own food, and you build your own little house, and then you can attend the teaching, as long as you abide by the rules. And so it started to become quite popular because he was totally into equality. So it didn't matter about male, female, but it did matter about making the commitment, attending the teaching, respecting the teaching. Absolutely no squabbling or arguing was allowed. If two people fought each other, then they were both sent away. So everybody has to look after everybody else. Everybody's equal. So the teacher is sitting, is not given any kind of preference there at the same. So if Jamie Punsot Rinpoche was attending a teaching, he would just sit the same as everybody else. I've seen a picture of Akron Rinpoche there attending teaching by Jamie Punsot Rinpoche. He's sitting there with everybody else. So it's not like there's any kind of hierarchy. So it's quite revolutionary in a way. And it became phenomenally popular. And so it ended up with 10,000 monastics and goodness knows how many lay people all living there attending teaching. So you can imagine that although it is in quite a remote place and it doesn't get that much attention from the authorities, it was not comfortable. So I think in 2001 they came in with bulldozers and started demolishing houses. And so that was pretty drastic. And then also they took Jimmy Punsot Rinpoche off to go and stay somewhere else for a while. And he came back again after a year, but in very poor health. And then I think he died in 2004. So again, they took him off and said, oh yeah, he's not well, we're going to look after him. But he died of a so-called heart attack in a Chinese hospital. So again, although it's quite a short time, this place has grown up. After being reduced in numbers, the people come again. And so it's massive. And Jimmy Punsot Rinpoche died, and he has a niece who seems to be, I don't know her name, but she is a formidable lady. So he died in this hospital. This woman apparently comes and somehow steals his body and takes it off to some unknown place for 49 days where they do all the prayers, and after 49 days have a proper kind of ceremony with a funeral pyre and all that, and do it exactly the way it should be done. And she is now the #1 Lama in this place. So there's a very famous Khenpo who came to the meeting in Oxford in 2014 about Akron Rinpoche, because he was a very good friend of Akron Rinpoche's, Khenpo Sultan Lodru. So he's quite well known, but there are 500 Khenpos apparently altogether who are sent out from this Larangar who teach all over Tibet. And there's at least one who came to some of our centres. He came to London and also to Cape Town, called Khenpo Sodarji. So there's quite a bit of activity. And anyway, Khenpo Sultan Lodru Rinpoche came to Oxford, and he told the story of how he had known Akron Rinpoche for about 4 years, so not for a very long time, but they really got on well. And the last known photograph of Akron Rinpoche was taken with this Khenpo Sultan Lodru. And apparently Akron Rinpoche had 3 rings, and they were passing on his lineage in a way. So he gave one when he was still alive to Chujal, his son, and he gave another one to this Khenpo Sultan Lodru when he met him that last time. And Khenpo Sultan Lodru is the most famous Lama in all of Tibet, and apparently Akron Rinpoche is saying, you've got to do this and you must do this, just like he did to everybody. So it's actually very gratifying, I felt, to hear that. Were you at?
No, I didn't. I'm sorry. Yeah.
But anyway, it doesn't matter too much. But he spoke with amazing respect and it was quite movingly about Akron Rinpoche. And he did say, there's often this feeling that, the Tibetans are doing it and we're just peely-wally, poor imitations, haven't a hope. And he said he was impressed by Akron Rinpoche's students because they have faith and constancy, because he has students who are still true to him, who've been with him for 30, 40 years. It's not like they come along and say, oh yeah, great, and then they're off to the kind of the more attractive Lama next week. There is some kind of constancy. So I think it's good, that the feedback is going back to Tibet, that there is a Lama out, probably loads of Lamas out in the West, but there are Lamas out in the West who are actually managing to do something in terms of students. Anyway, that's by the by. But this Larangar, or Serta, is run by this woman who apparently is very large. She's the most important woman. She's very well educated. She gives a lot of the teaching. So she's actually, in terms of the organisation, the hierarchy, if there is a hierarchy, but she's more important than this Khenpo Sultan Lodru. She's the number one.
And what would you say her personality is?
I don't know. I don't actually know that much about her. Obviously, I've never been there. So I don't really know from first-hand experience that much about her. But she's somebody who has enormous confidence and capability. So she's not fazed by running a place which houses 10 or 20,000 people. It's unimaginable. Some of you will know the difficulties that you face in running a place like this. So that massive a place, they're providing food for all no, they don't provide food. But they're providing teaching from all of these people. They've got loads of temples, loads of teaching going on all the time, and the people running the place are responsible for giving teaching. So there's really a lot. And then also dealing with the authorities who are so suspicious. They've had several times when the bulldozers have come in and they've started, taking things down. Apparently just last year it happened. Apparently several people committed suicide because they could not bear to leave. And, so it's a big deal. It's not just a kind of nice thing that's happening. It's really dealing with a lot of stuff. So she must be quite formidable.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Wesanam daye tamche zekpanye tabni ni bedranam pamsen jegana chembalam tropaye sipin solen rowa drova